Huguette Clark, the mysterious heiress to a copper fortune, owned some of the most beautiful properties in America. Yet for decades, these opulent homes stood empty, while Huguette lived out her days in a small hospital room, isolated from friends, family, and the outside world. Today, we'll unravel the tragic story of how she may have been swindled by those she trusted most. Born in 1906, Huguette Clark was the daughter of William A. Clark, one of the richest men of his time. The Clark family's wealth was unimaginable, with sprawling estates in Santa Barbara, Connecticut, and an extravagant apartment in New York City. La Beau Chateau, located in New Canaan, Connecticut, is one of the great estate properties in Fairfield County. Built in the 1930s, the mansion features 22 rooms and spans 14,266 square feet. Huguette Clark purchased the 52-acre estate in 1951. She added a two-story addition in 1952. The property includes various outbuildings, such as a carriage house and caretaker cottages, all of which remain largely unused during her lifetime. Despite owning it for over 60 years, she never lived in the mansion, which remained empty and untouched, with only caretakers maintaining the property. Bellesguardo, meaning beautiful lookout, is an estate located on the coast of Santa Barbara, California. The property was originally purchased by Huguette's father, William Andrews Clark, in 1923. After his death, his widow, Anna Clark, decided to replace the existing Italianate villa with a new mansion, built in 1936. It was designed in an 18th century French style, featuring over 23,000 square feet of opulent living spaces, and includes 27 rooms, ornate wood paneling, detailed cornices, and elaborate chandeliers. Anna and her daughter used Bellesguardo as a summer retreat, enjoying the estate until the early 1950s. After Anna's death in 1963, Huguette inherited the estate but never returned to live there. Instead, she instructed the staff to maintain the property in its original condition, leading to the mansion remaining largely untouched for nearly 70 years. The William A. Clark Mansion was a lavish Gilded Age mansion located at 960 Fifth Avenue in New York City. Commissioned by Huguette's father, William Clark, construction of the mansion began in 1897 and was completed in 1911. The mansion was an epitome of opulence and excess, embodying the grandeur and extravagance of the era. In 1927, it was sold for less than half of its construction cost, and shortly thereafter it was demolished to make way for a luxury apartment building. Huguette owned 3 separate apartments at 907 Fifth Avenue in New York City, encompassing an entire floor and a half of the luxury co-op building. These apartments totaled over 15,000 square feet and featured 42 rooms combined, making them some of the largest and most opulent residential spaces in Manhattan. Clark and her mother, Anna, moved into 907 Fifth Avenue shortly after the death of her father, William Andrews Clark, in 1925. The building, styled after an Italian Renaissance palazzo, was considered one of the most prestigious addresses in New York. Over the years, Huguette acquired additional units in the building, eventually owning apartments on both the 8th and 12th floors. The interiors of these apartments remained largely untouched and were filled with valuable art, antiques, and a significant collection of dolls, which Huguette avidly collected. All of these places were her homes that she loved and cared for. Despite her immense wealth, Huguette's life took a sad and unexpected turn. As she grew older, Huguette became increasingly reclusive. After the death of her mother in 1963, she withdrew from society, retreating to her luxurious apartment across from Central Park, and nobody really knew much about her for the next 30 years. In 1991, Huguette Clark had grown frail, with numerous cancerous lesions disfiguring her face, making it difficult for her to see or eat. She was admitted to Doctors Hospital on the Upper East Side for treatment. Physicians described her as extremely thin, looking, quote, like an apparition, like somebody out of a concentration camp, end quote. She successfully underwent surgery to remove the tumors from her face, along with reconstructive surgery on her lips, right cheek, and right eyelid. A nurse noted that she behaved, quote, like a homeless person, no clothes, not in touch with the world, had not seen a doctor for 20 years, and she threw everyone out of the room." End quote. What was initially supposed to be a short-term hospital stay instead turned into a 20-year confinement. Initially a resident at Doctors Hospital, she later transferred to Beth Israel Medical Center after the two hospitals merged. Huguette never returned to her magnificent homes, even though she owned a massive apartment just minutes away. Instead, she spent her final decades in a small hospital room, rarely seeing the light of day. How on earth did this happen? Huguette Clark's isolation made her vulnerable. She had no close family or friends to look out for her interests. Over time, she became increasingly dependent on her nurses and hospital staff, many of whom may have saw an opportunity to exploit her. Her primary nurse, Hadassah Perry, and other staff members became her closest companions, filling the void left by her isolation. They gained her trust, and Huguette, in turn, showered them with gifts and money. It is estimated that Huguette gave more than $31 million to those around her during her time in the hospital. Nurse Hadassah Perry received a significant portion of this wealth. Throughout the years, Clark bestowed over $30 million worth of cash, properties, vehicles, medical expenses, and college tuition upon Perry and her family. It is said that she even gave her a $1.7 million Stradivarius violin. Although Huguette's net worth exceeded $300 million, she struggled with cash flow in her later years. To finance generous gifts, she sold properties, giving $10 million to her best friend and $25,000 to hospital workers who had repaired her television. So what do you think? How did Huguette, an intelligent and private woman, get so thoroughly manipulated? The answer, people believe, was in her profound sense of loneliness and desire for companionship. As her health deteriorated and her isolation deepened, she craved the attention and care that the hospital staff provided. They became her surrogate family. Despite her immense wealth, Huguette's living conditions were shockingly modest. She lived in a small, sparsely furnished hospital room, rarely leaving its confines. Her only view of the outside world was through a single window. For 2 decades, she remained in this environment, disconnected from the life of luxury she had always known. Huguette's situation raises serious ethical questions about the responsibilities of caregivers and the vulnerability of the elderly, especially those who are isolated and wealthy. If true, then the hospital staff's exploitation of Huguette highlights a tragic abuse of trust. Many people believe that Huguette's physical isolation was compounded by the mental isolation that may have been imposed by her caretakers. They supposedly discouraged visits from anyone outside their circle, further cutting her off from potential sources of help. Her few remaining family members were supposedly kept at a distance, unaware of the extent of her isolation. In September of 2010, a New York judge issued a brief, 1-paragraph ruling denying a request from Clark's grand half-nephew and grand half-nieces to appoint an independent guardian to manage Miss Clark's affairs. Why on earth would a judge do that? It has been said that even when distant relatives and friends attempted to reach out, they were often intercepted by the hospital staff, who supposedly controlled Huguette's access to the outside world. If true, many people believe that this control allowed them to maintain their influence and continue their supposed financial exploitation. It wasn't until Huguette's death in 2011, at the age of 104, that the accusations of her exploitation came to light. Legal battles ensued as her extended family challenged the validity of her will and the substantial gifts given to her caretakers. The courts were tasked with unraveling the complex web of deceit and manipulation. The case of Huguette Clark was unprecedented in many ways. It highlighted the importance of legal safeguards for vulnerable individuals and the need for oversight to prevent such exploitation. The court had to carefully examine the intentions behind Huguette's financial decisions, many of which were made under questionable circumstances. The court eventually ruled that the gifts given to the hospital staff were made under undue influence. However, the emotional and psychological damage done to Huguette Clark could never be undone. Her story serves a cautionary tale about the perils of isolation and the potential for abuse when trust is misplaced. Huguette Clark's life, once filled with unimaginable wealth and potential, ended in tragic isolation. Her mansion stood empty, her personal possessions fleeced, her art collection unseen, and her fortune dissipated. Her legacy, however, is a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities that accompany wealth and the importance of vigilance in safeguarding the well-being of the elderly. After learning of the tragic tale of Huguette Clark, what can we learn from how she was treated? How can we better protect the elderly and isolated individuals from exploitation? What do you think about the people around her getting so much of her wealth? What legal and social measures can be implemented to prevent similar situations? Has something like this ever happened to somebody that you know or knew? What role does social isolation play in making individuals vulnerable to manipulation and abuse? What responsibilities do caregivers and medical professionals have in safeguarding the well-being of their patients? What steps can families take to maintain strong connections with elderly relatives, even if they are reclusive or distant? How can individuals ensure that their financial and personal affairs are managed according to their true wishes? What warning signs might indicate that an elderly person is being manipulated or exploited? How does society view and treat the elderly, and what changes are needed to improve their quality of life? Thank you for joining me in exploring the tragic tale of Huguette Clark. If you found this story compelling, please like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth looks at the strange stories of intriguing people, places, and events. Until next time, I wish you safe travels on all your journeys.